Unknown manager Antonio Andolini has just been sacked after returning Milan back to the top of Italian and European football. Now he's taken over crosstown rivals Inter Milan, where he has 3 seasons to win the Scudetto and Champions League. Can he do it before he retires back to his vineyard? Stay tuned to find out. Before we dive in, only 4% of you are subscribed, so go ahead and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. After 4 long seasons in charge of AC Milan, which included 2 Scudetto wins, 3 Coppa Italia titles, and a Champions League trophy, Andolini was sacked due to financial mismanagement. He had risen from virtually unknown manager to one of the highest rated managers in Europe, and now he was out of a job. Milan fans were furious that Chairman Lee would sack a treble-winning manager, one of the greatest in the club's modern history, so unceremoniously. Their anger grew even further when within a year, Lee was forced to surrender the club to the American hedge fund, Elliott Management Corporation, after continuing to miss loan repayments. However, that was no longer Andolini's concern. He was now semi-retired, living in his vineyard in the countryside of Corleone, Sicily. He had received offers from other clubs, but he loved the city of Milan and refused to manage anywhere else in Italy or Europe. That was until he received an offer from Inter Milan to become their new manager. At first, he was hesitant to take over the fiercest rivals of the club he'd grown to love, but deep down, he still had a burning passion for the game and unfinished business and management. Inter offered the perfect opportunity to finish his career on his own terms. Andolini signed a 3-year deal to become the new manager of Inter Milan, with the intention of seeing out the contract and ending his managerial career when it concluded. And so, Andolini now had 3 seasons to restore Inter to the pinnacle of Italian and European football. It would not be an easy task, as Inter had just finished 7th place with a squad in need of serious overhaul. But Andolini has faced similar challenges before, and he was a perfect man for the job. Before any rebuild could begin, Andolini had to meet and assess the current squad. The captain surprisingly was 37-year-old Nemanja Vidic, who was still in decent shape for Serie A standards, while the vice-captain was Matej Kovacic, who had grown into one of the best midfielders in Europe. Up front, the main man was Mario Balotelli, a player Andolini had famously passed on during his time at Milan. However, Andolini was now willing to work with the eccentric Italian, who had since established himself as the top striker in the league. Elsewhere, Inter had a few decent squad players, such as Shaqiri, Icardi, and Greek winger Mavropanos. But beyond that, the squad was lacking in quality and aging out. In goal, Samir Handanovic had departed for Real Madrid the previous season, leaving the unproven Paulo Gazzaniga as a current first choice. Andolini knew the summer transfer window would be crucial to kick-starting the new project. However, there was another player in Inter's academy who could contribute to the first team, an 18-year-old defensive midfielder named Lorenzo Mancini. He was immediately recommended to Andolini for promotion to the senior squad. The youngster was a nephew of former Inter manager and Scudetto winner Roberto Mancini. Lorenzo Mancini was already being touted as a future Inter captain and the next great Italian midfielder. Given Andolini's success with academy products in his final season at Milan, he is more than willing to integrate Mancini into the first team. In fact, he planned on making the young Italian a focal point of his rebuild, as his go-to deep-lying playmaker. Mancini wasn't the only academy product that Andolini was factoring into his plans. After years at Milan, he knew every inch of that club, and more importantly, he knew which youngsters to keep an eye out for. While Verdejo and Corrides were considered untouchable, Andolini quickly triggered the release clause of 17-year-old Greek fullback named Nikos Manos. A highly touted prospect with exceptional technical ability, Manos was a player Andolini hoped to mold into a world-class fullback. With the first signing out of the way, Andolini got to work clearing out the deadwood. He sold a staggering 9 players for a combined total of just £26.5 million. The amount recouped was underwhelming given the number of departures, but Andolini knew it was worth it to begin rebuilding the squad in his image. A major reason he joined Inter was the guaranteed investment from the board, who reassured him that they could afford the promised signings, unlike the situation at Milan. And so Andolini got to work, first aiming to improve the wing options. His first signing was experienced winger Samir Nasri from Manchester City for £23.5 million. Next, he brought in Tottenham outcast Eric Lamela for just £13.5 million. He then turned his attention to the defense, which was in desperate need of reinforcements. Staying in the Premier League, he signed Manchester United centre-back Chris Smalling for £14 million. His final signing of the window was left-back Marcos Alonso from Fiorentina for £8 million. Given Inter's limited appeal to top players at the time, Andolini felt that this was a solid first step towards rebuilding the club into title contenders. As the season drew near, Andolini had concerns about the squad, but ultimately hoped that they had enough quality to secure a Champions League spot. He knew that he needed to get the best out of a limited squad. He would set up in a 4-2-3-1 formation with Balotelli as the focal point of the attack. Nasri operated on the left wing while Shaqiri played through the middle. In midfield, Mancini and Kovacic formed a double pivot to shield the defense, which featured former Manchester United teammates Vidic and Smalling. Alonso and Santon started at fullbacks with Gazzaniga in goal. The Andolini era at Inter Milan began with a comfortable 3-1 victory away against Torino. Balotelli opened the season with a goal, while new signing Lamela made an immediate impact. Inter carried that momentum into an impressive start, going 7-2-1 in their first 10 matches, and climbing to an unexpected second place in the table. A highlight of the run was a dominant 5-2 win over Napoli at home, where Balotelli netted a hat-trick to bring his tally to 9 goals in 10 games. Nasri also got on the score sheet, quickly establishing himself as the key figure in the attack. However, not everything went smoothly. A Chris Smalling own goal handed Inter their first defeat under Andolini, a humbling moment in an otherwise strong opening stretch. Still, the team entered the Milan derby in fine form, with Andolini preparing for what was promised to be an emotional return. The first Milan derby since Andolini's sacking and subsequent move to Inter was, predictably, an emotionally charged affair. Unfortunately for neutrals, the match quickly devolved into an ugly display of hard tackles and non-stop fouling. Perhaps it is fitting given the lingering animosity between Andolini and Milan's upper management, who had failed to protect him from being dismissed. In the end, the game finished in a dull, albeit bruising, 0-0 draw. The draw in the Milan derby was followed by a disappointing 2-0 loss to Roma, which would unexpectedly become a pivotal moment in Andolini's project. After Gervinho's opening goal, a costly error from Gazzaniga highlighted the urgent need for a new goalkeeper. However, it was David Santon's poor performance and subsequent crash out that would shift the trajectory of the squad. Frustrated at being substituted early in the second half, Santon exchanged heated words with Andolini as he left the pitch, and it would prove to be his final appearance for Inter. In his place, young Nikos Manos stepped in and immediately impressed, showing he was ready for first-team football. Despite the defeat, Andolini inadvertently found a long-term solution at right back, with Manos quickly becoming the de facto starter for the rest of his tenure. Despite another poor performance from Gazzaniga against Lazio, Inter ended the year in otherwise solid form, earning 7 points from a possible 12. They finished the calendar year in third place, just 5 points off top and 1 point ahead of Milan. With the January transfer window open, David Santon departed the club following his row with Andolini, and Martin Montoya was brought in as a backup to Manos for £11.5 million. Yet that wouldn't be the only piece of business during the window, as Mateo Kovacic unexpectedly handed in a transfer request. Andolini preferred to keep the talented Croatian, but if he wasn't committed to the project, he was more than willing to let him leave. So Barcelona ended up paying a massive £55 million for the Croatian midfielder. As the window's deadline approached, Andolini returned to the Premier League, this time signing Ramirez from Chelsea for £15 million to partner alongside Mancini in the midfield. Inter started the year with a commanding 4-1 statement win over Juventus, Andolini's first clash against the club since his arrival. Nasri continued his excellent form, scoring twice, including a brilliant curling effort. Manos also reinforced why he became a starting right back, providing an assist to Shaqiri's fourth goal. The win kicked off a near-flawless January and February run as Inter went 7-1-0 in the league to start the year. The stretch also included a 5-1 dismantling of Fiorentina in the Coppa Italia quarter-final, setting up a dramatic semi-final clash against Milan. The first leg was far more entertaining for neutrals than the earlier league clash between the two sides. Unfortunately for Andolini, it was a rough night for Inter as Milan struck early, with Leroy Fer leaving Gazzaniga frozen like a statue. Inter looked disorganized, and a header from Lacazette nearly led to disaster, with Gazzaniga fumbling the shot and deflecting it off his own player. A solid defensive effort from Smalling then prevented Lacazette from doubling Milan's lead. However, the Englishman undid all his good work in the 90th minute, botching a clearance that sent Lacazette through on goal. The Frenchman made no mistake, slotting home to make it 2-0. The disappointing first leg loss raised concerns among fans, that Andolini had some kind of mental block against his former club. The 3-2 win in the return leg did little to ease those fears, as Inter crashed out of the Coppa Italia. It was a frantic back-and-forth game in which Inter never gained control. Every Inter goal was swiftly answered by a Milan strike, leaving them unable to mount a proper comeback. Andolini had won silverware in every season he had managed so far, but the 4-3 aggregate defeat meant there would be no cup success in his first season at Inter. Still, an outside chance at a shock Scudetto win remained alive. Unfortunately, despite a late winner from Lamella and Naples, any hope of a title run for Inter went up in smoke after a poor stretch of 5 losses in their next 9 games. It began with a 2-0 defeat at home to Fiorentina, a team they had comfortably beaten in the Coppa Italia. Embarrassing losses to mid-table teams like Sampdoria soon followed, all but ending their Scudetto ambitions. A disastrous goalkeeping display from Gazzaniga against Roma officially ended any remaining title hopes. The Argentine had consistently been the weak link in Andolini's side, and it's painfully clear that a replacement was needed in the summer. The poor run left Inter 12 points adrift from the league leaders Roma, yet they still remained in a strong position to qualify for Champions League, especially with the 4th and final Milan derby on the horizon. A Mario Balotelli penalty saw Inter walk away with all 3 points after a rash tackle from Pepe. Andolini had finally gotten one over his former side, securing a big win in the race for Champions League qualification. Yet that crucial victory was rendered meaningless in the very next match, as Inter fell 1-0 away to Lazio. Inter's final chance to hold on to 3rd place came in a decisive clash against Juventus, with both sides level on points and Inter only ahead on goal difference. In a match that summed up Inter's season, defensive frailties once again cost him dearly. Poor marking left Gazzaniga exposed, and the keeper did very little to stop Juventus from taking their chances. What had seemed like a momentum-shifting win against Milan ultimately proved to be false hope, as Inter finished 4th, 1 place shy of the Champions League qualification. Meanwhile, Roma became the first team outside of Milan and Juventus to win the Scudetto since Andolini's arrival in the Serie A. Surprisingly, Milan slumped to 5th place, ending the season below Inter, as financial instability at the club began to spill onto the pitch. In terms of end-of-season accolades, Balotelli finished 2nd in the Golden Boot race, with new Juventus signing Robert Lewandowski claiming both the Golden Boot and Most Valuable Player award. Gervinho secured the Top Assist Provider award, while Lopez once again took home the Golden Glove. Balotelli was the only Inter player named in the Team of the Season, with Roma dominating the selections. Balotelli was named Inter's Player of the Season after a standout campaign in which the Italian recorded 23 goals and 7 assists in 31 matches, finishing as both the club's top scorer and leading assist provider. Nasri followed as the 2nd highest goal scorer with 15 goals, as the Frenchman proved to be a revelation. Meanwhile, Icardi, Shaqiri, and Mahrez had solid seasons, but the end-of-season stats revealed a clear issue of an unbalanced squad, overly reliant on a small group of key players. Andolini looked to resolve the team's over-reliance on the key players as the 2019 summer transfer window opened, with Inter still reeling from the late-season collapse. Unfortunately, without Champions League football, big-name signings were difficult to secure, forcing Andolini to get creative with his dealings. As with the previous season, his first order of business was clearing out the deadwood. He sold a number of unused squad players, with 10 departures generating £28.8 million. With an increased transfer budget and room in the squad, Andolini finally moved to replace Gazzaniga as the club's number 1. The Argentine had endured a disastrous season under Andolini, and it was clear that Inter could not progress any further with him in goal. To fill the void, Andolini signed veteran goalkeeper Victor Valdez from Manchester United for £15.5 million. The Spaniard was enjoying a late career resurgence and would be a major upgrade between the posts. Another player experiencing a late career resurgence was former Inter loanee Lukas Podolski, who had left Arsenal and become one of the Bundesliga's top scorers with Schalke. Andolini would bring him back to the San Siro for £12.5 million, promising a more impactful second stint. Elsewhere, the Italian boss brought in another familiar face in veteran midfielder Thiago Motta to bolster the squad depth and add leadership in the dressing room. Staying in Paris, Andolini also signed David Luiz for £23.5 million to shore up the defense. And finally, seeking more creativity in the attack, Andolini once again turned to the Bundesliga, signing Henrik Mkhitaryan for £21.5 million. With the busy transfer window finally behind them, Inter felt confident in the squad that Andolini had assembled, as the Italian entered year 2 of his 3-year contract. The team saw defensive improvements with the arrival of Valdez, Luiz, and Mata, while Podolski and Mkhitaryan were expected to contribute goals and assists. Perhaps the most notable change of the offseason, however, was the announcement of the new vice-captain Lorenzo Mancini. With club captain Vidic's role diminishing, Andolini placed his full trust in the Inter Academy product, who had just enjoyed a standout campaign the previous year. And finally, the season got underway with Inter making a dramatic start, going 9-1-1 in their first 11 games. It began with a 1-0 win over Napoli, where Balotelli picked up right where he left off the previous season. The early run also featured two last-minute heroics. First, Balotelli scored a 90th minute equalizer against Lazio, and Lucas Podolski netted the 90th minute winner against the reigning champions Roma at home. The Nerazzurri had kicked off their campaign in thrilling fashion and sat in second place, just behind surprise league leaders Sampdoria. But Milan would get a chance to declare their title intentions, with games against Milan, Sampdoria, and Juventus all coming up in a row. The first game saw Inter run out 3-0 victors in the Milan derby, as Andolini had seemingly overcome any jitters facing his former side. The new signings were all proving their worth, as Valdez showed why he was an upgrade on Gazzaniga, while Podolski was proving to be a useful super sub. A definitive win over Sampdoria followed, as Nazari's brace gave Inter a 2-1 win over the title pretenders. Inter were proving to be the real deal, as the Nerazzurri headed to Turin. Thanks to a brilliant Balotelli brace, Inter finished the game as definitive 3-0 winners, finally stamping their claim on the title. Yet one signing had been struggling to adapt. Henrik Mkhitaryan was finding life in Serie A difficult and delivered a poor display in Turin. He was reluctantly substituted just before the half-hour mark, with Andolini understanding his disappointment. However, what the manager did not understand or tolerate was Mkhitaryan's poor attitude on the bench. As his teammates were celebrating a big victory, he sat sulking in the stands. Inter were quickly running away with the league title, sitting atop of the table just before the turn of the new year, 5 points clear of second place with a game in hand. Andolini had hoped to finish the year strong with a victory away in Florence. However, Mkhitaryan's frustrations would soon boil over. With the side trailing 1-0, Andolini turned to the Armenian with the hopes of him redeeming himself for his previous incident. Instead, Mkhitaryan committed a reckless tackle in the box and was shown a straight red card. His petulant and unnecessary challenge condemned Inter to a 3-0 defeat. Andolini had seen enough. He made it immediately clear that Henrik Mkhitaryan had played his final game for Inter. With the winter window now open, Andolini quickly sent Mkhitaryan out on loan to Marseille for the remainder of the season. To replace him, he opted for a slightly different profile, bringing in hard-working Moussa Sissoko from Newcastle for £12 million. With the distraction of Mkhitaryan gone, Inter picked up 12 points from the possible 15 in January. This included another emphatic 3-0 victory over Milan, as Andolini continued to assert his dominance over the club that had sacked him. The match also saw Mancini score a brace of penalties, with the midfielder rapidly establishing himself as a true leader within the team. Then on transfer deadline day, news suddenly broke that Gonzalo Higuain had requested a move away from Napoli. With very little time remaining in the window, Andolini convinced the board to sanction a move for the Argentine striker. And so for £38 million, Andolini got his man, adding even more firepower up top. The prospect of a Balotelli-Higuain partnership was too tempting to ignore, and it was a duo that would strike fear into the rest of the Serie A. Of course, the first game after the window closed was a return to Naples for Higuain. Nasri opened the scoring with a moment of brilliance, and right on cue, Higuain came off the bench to make his debut, scoring against his former side. He finished him off with a second goal as Inter ran out 3-0 victors, though Higuain chose not to celebrate against his old club. The Balotelli-Higuain partnership was already paying dividends, as Inter tore through the Serie A with another record of 9-1-1, mirroring the strong start to the season. When the two weren't paired up top together, Andolini had the luxury of bringing off a fresh, world-class striker from the bench. The run led to a title-clinching showdown against second-place Juventus, with Andolini on the verge of reclaiming the Scudetto, this time with Inter Milan. It was a dull 0-0 affair until a deflected shot saw vice-captain Mancini score the game-winning goal in a 1-0 victory that sealed the title. Though the title had felt like a foregone conclusion heading into the match, it was anything but guaranteed when Andolini first took over. He had now completed a historic turnaround to deliver at Scudetto. Andolini also made history by becoming the first ever manager to win the Scudetto with both AC Milan and Inter Milan. It was the first goal he set for himself when he joined the club, and it felt all the sweeter to prove to the world that he would not be defined by how things ended at Milan. Meanwhile, in the Europa League, Inter breezed through a relatively weak group stage, heavily rotating the starting 11 throughout it. Entering the knockout phase, their dominance continued as they swept past CSKA Moscow 5-1 in aggregate, Sporting 6-1 in aggregate, and Everton 4-3. Andolini stuck to his philosophy of heavy rotation, saving his starters for the league while giving opportunities to others. Players like Icardi took center stage in the Europa League, while signings like Moussa Sissoko also played a major role, with the Frenchman contributing several crucial goals. The Europa League adventure brought a familiar semi-final opponent for Andolini, as Inter were drawn against Manchester City. Andolini had previously knocked out the Citizens in the Champions League while managing Milan, and now had the chance to defeat them again, this time in the Europa League, en route to the final. Just like before, two former City players in the form of Samir Nasri and Mario Balotelli were set to face their old club for the first time. Within minutes, Balotelli struck against his former side, scoring the opening goal of the semi-final. But City weren't going down without a fight. Alvaro Negredo blasted a shot past Gazzaniga, who was starting in place of an injured Valdez, to level the score. Shortly after, more misfortune struck Inter as Shaqiri landed awkwardly and injured his knee, forcing an early substitution. Moments later, Negredo scored again, putting City up 2-1 as things quickly unraveled for Inter. However, it was another ex-City player who would turn the tide, as Samir Nasri weaved his way into the box and calmly slotted home to level the match once again. With the game seemingly destined to end in a 0-0 draw, a dazzling solo run from Manos led to Balotelli scoring his second of the night, giving Inter a 3-2 advantage. Then, in a desperate attempt at an equalizer, Joe Hart came out for a last-minute corner, but instead of a heroic moment, Gazzaniga claimed the cross and launched the ball forward. Balotelli's flicked header set off a foot race between Samir Nasri and Gonzalo Higuain. The slower German couldn't keep up, and the Argentine calmly slotted in an empty net for Inter's fourth away goal, sealing a stunning 4-2 win in the first leg and effectively ending the tie. A 1-1 scoreline in the return leg would see Inter move on to the final to face Besiktas. But first, a 0-0 draw at the end of the season served as a backdrop for Inter's title celebrations. Mancini was given the honor for lifting the Scudetto, an academy graduate living out his ultimate dream. It was a joyous moment for the fans, who had endured many rough and trophyless seasons. Now, thanks to Andolini, Inter were back on top of Italian football. Focus quickly shifted to the Europa League final as Inter prepared for their first European final since the 2010 Champions League triumph under Jose Mourinho. North London would host the showdown, with both teams battling out for European glory. Besiktas were worthy opponents, having knocked out Andolini's former side Milan on the way to the final. Just 20 minutes in though, Greek winger Mavras rounded the keeper, got trips, but would still manage to sweep the ball into the net from the ground. An inventive piece of improvised finishing that gave Inter the dream start. Unfortunately for the Turkish side, Inter were simply too much to handle. Balotelli headed in a second goal from a corner, and moments later the Italian calmly slotted home another to seal a 3-0 victory for Inter. At full time, Inter were crowned European champions once again. It might not have been the Champions League, but the Europa League trophy was a welcome prize for a club that had endured so many years without silverware. Mancini once again lifted the trophy, with the young Italian quickly making a name for himself as one of Europe's brightest emerging stars. It was yet another trophy for Andolini, and the long-awaited return to prominence for Inter. The club had made a loud statement that they were coming for the Champions League next. And that statement came through loud and clear, as Inter finished the season as dominant champions, earning the second highest points tally in the club's history. Meanwhile, Milan continued to struggle following Andolini's departure, with a change in ownership further destabilizing the squad. Mario Balotelli claimed both the Golden Boot and the Most Valuable Player awards. After a stellar season, Victor Valdez proved to be a critical signing, winning the Golden Glove despite missing the final month of the campaign. And Trevino was once again the top assist provider. Unlike the previous season, Inter dominated the Team of the Season selections, with Valdez, Smalling, David Luiz, Nasri, and Shaqiri all joining Balotelli in the lineup. Meanwhile, Tevez was once again selected, as he seemed like an almost eternal fixture in the team. Balotelli was once again named Inter's Player of the Season after recording 29 goals and 12 assists in 47 matches, finishing as both the club's top goal scorer and leading assist provider. Nasri once again proved his worth as the second highest goal scorer in the team with 18 goals, while Higuain and Podolski provided a vital spark to the attack. Lastly, Shaqiri enjoyed another solid season under Andolini. And so, with the 2019-20 season finished, Andolini entered the final year of both his contract and his managerial career, and he had one goal in mind: to get his hands on the Champions League trophy one last time. Inter were among the clear favorites heading into the season, but with the summer window now open, Andolini wanted to ensure his side had the experience needed to go all the way. With this being his final season, Andolini no longer had any need to build for the future. Instead, he started the window off with a bang, bringing back club icon Wesley Sneijder for £30 million. The Dutch midfielder had previously won the Champions League with Inter, and Andolini was eager to inject that kind of experience into his squad. He was also brought in to fill the creative midfielder void left by Henrik Mkhitaryan, whose fallout with the manager of the previous season had sealed his fate. The Armenian was sold in the summer for a cut price of £14 million to Everton, after it became well known that Andolini wanted him out. Mauro Icardi also departed, sold for £34.5 million to Atletico Madrid, after being made redundant by the arrival of Gonzalo Higuain. Elsewhere, Andolini brought back two more former players. First, Julio Cesar, who returned to provide competent backup, with Gazzaniga not even fit to be a number 2 option. The second was Sully Montari, who had revitalized his career at Sampdoria. Ironically, Andolini had sold the Ghanaian in his debut season at Milan, yet he was more than willing to bring him back now, as a reliable defensive option off the bench. Finally, Andolini wrapped up the window by signing Cesar Azpilicueta for £26.4 million to further reinforce the defense. Andolini entered his final year in management with an experienced and battle-tested squad. The team was already league and European champions, boasting two of the most clinical strikers in the continent. Yet the Italian manager hoped that the additions of the seasoned veterans would be the final piece needed to capture the elusive Champions League trophy. The season began with what had become a yearly tradition: Andolini facing Juventus in the Supercoppa. And, staying true to the tradition, Andolini's side emerged victorious with a thrilling 120th minute winner from Higuain in extra time, kicking off the season with a trophy. They followed that up with their first official statement of intent for the Champions League, defeating Real Madrid in UEFA Super Cup, thanks to a brace from Sneijder on his return to the club. The first half of Inter's title defense resembled a distracted team, with their eyes set on a much bigger prize. Andolini's side won 14-4-3 in their first 21 league games of the season. The run featured several big wins, including a 4-1 dismantling of Napoli at home, a dramatic late winner from Montari in the Milan derby, and a Higuain brace that sealed a comfortable 2-0 victory over Roma. Yet the same stretch still had some lapses in focus, with points dropped against lesser sides like Genoa, Sampdoria, and Bologna. Inter appeared hyper-focused on the Champions League, so much so that the performance against lower-tier Serie A clubs suffered, with the club seemingly only rising to the occasion in marquee matches. And yet their focus on the Champions League ultimately backfired on them early on, with a middling start to the group stage, with 2 1-1 draws against Wolfsburg and Malmo, left them sitting in second place ahead of a crucial match against Arsenal. The North London side arrived looking to seize control of the group, while Andolini's men were desperate to ignite their campaign. It was a tense and back-and-forth encounter, with Arsenal missing a golden opportunity to take the lead when Alexis Sanchez squandered an absolute point-blank tap-in. Inter capitalized on Arsenal's wastefulness after earning a penalty, which Mario Balotelli coolly converted to secure a desperately needed 1-0 win. That result ended up being a turning point, as Inter picked up 7 points from their final 3 matches, including a late equalizer from Balotelli at the Emirates, a goal that allowed Inter to leapfrog Arsenal and finish top of the group. Their reward was a round of 16 matchup against Sevilla, as Andolini's final European campaign continued with the hopes of ending his career on a high. A notable development in the first half of the season was Mancini's rise to superstardom. The Italian had become a de facto leader of the team, a role cemented by his man-of-the-match performance against Juventus. The young midfielder scored twice and then set up Sneijder for a goal, with a brilliant backheel to seal a commanding 3-0 victory. Thanks in large part to Mancini's leadership, Inter sat atop of the table at the halfway mark, though just 1 point clear, with a big return fixture against Juventus looming. Andolini hoped that his team could finally pull away from the rest of the pack. Instead, disaster struck, Inter found themselves 3-0 down in the first 40 minutes in Turin. The Nerazzurri were shell-shocked as Juventus tore them apart, and the title race looked to be wide open as the defending champions were imploding. But Andolini's side responded with the heart of a true champion. Schneider's curling effort before the break sparked life into the team, and Gonzalo Higuain added a second early on in the second half, and his scrappy goal, barely forced over the line by Manos, completed a remarkable comeback. Juventus were left stunned, and Inter had salvaged not just a point, but their title ambitions. The comeback in Turin sparked what would ultimately become the title-clinching run, as Inter went undefeated for the rest of the season, winning 11 and drawing 5 on their way to the second consecutive Scudetto. It was a dominant stretch where Inter cruised through the league, delivering Andolini one last domestic title before his retirement. But that wasn't the ending that he truly craved. He still dreamt of one last elusive Champions League triumph. Inter began the knockout phase against Sevilla, advancing to the quarterfinals with a 4-3 aggregate victory, sealed by a 3-2 win at home. In the quarterfinals, they were drawn against a familiar face. Former Inter manager Jose Mourinho, now in charge of Chelsea. Chelsea's defensive, disciplined, and pragmatic style were a perfect counter to Andolini's 5-3-2 setup in European competitions. On a snowy night at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea thoroughly dominated Inter. Diego Costa's clinical finishing made the difference, as the London side walked away with a 2-0 victory in the first leg. Andolini's dream now hung on by a thread. The Nerazzurri would need to overturn a 2-0 deficit, but as the saying goes, 90 minutes in the San Siro can feel like a very long time. Determined to fight back, Andolini altered his approach. He lined up Inter in a bold 3-4-3, making it clear that he would attack from the start. They had to, as Chelsea's defense was one of the best in Europe, and now featured Andolini's former star Jan Vertonghen. Chelsea's defense lived up to its reputation early on, repelling wave after wave of Inter's attacks as Andolini's side grew increasingly frustrated. Then came the first mistake of the match from Chelsea, pounced on by Schneider, who forced the ball into the net to equalize for Inter. The San Siro erupted and the stadium was rocking as Chelsea looked suddenly shaken. Soon after, another costly error left their visitors completely rattled, as they gave away a penalty in the 80th minute. Balotelli stepped up and calmly converted, just as he had done all season. Inter had overturned their first leg deficit and Chelsea were crumbling as the match headed to extra time. And it was there where an unlikely hero emerged. Substitute Mavropanos sliced through Chelsea's defense and blasted a shot past Cech to give Inter the lead. Chelsea had nothing left to offer as Inter had done it and made the comeback, and would now go on to advance to the semi-finals with a dramatic 3-2 aggregate win. And now, perhaps the most familiar opponent awaited Andolini in the semi-finals. Juventus, the club that had come to define his managerial career. They were an unstoppable force when he first arrived, and over the years, he had battled them for countless trophies. And now he'd have to go through them one last time to achieve his dream and reach a Champions League final. The first leg was played in the San Siro, with both sides dreaming of a place in the final. As they had done in the past, Juventus struck early, and Andolini's dream was already beginning to slip away. Thankfully for Inter, a response came before halftime, as Shaqiri found space in the box and slotted home the equalizer. The rest of the second leg was largely uneventful, save for the dirty shove by Morata on David Luiz that somehow went unpunished. Back in Turin for the second leg, the match remained deadlocked until a stunning free kick from Wesley Schneider broke the silence. The Dutch midfielder had been enjoying a remarkable return to the club, and now he had just put them one foot firmly into the final. Moments later, Juventus thought they had drawn level, as Morata found the back of the net, only for the goal to be ruled offside. Juventus fans were furious, but replays confirmed that the linesman had in fact got the call right. Juventus would come to rue that moment, as Shaqiri's second goal of the tie sealed the win. Inter were now Champions League finalists for the first time since 2010, and Andolini had claimed one last victory over his most fiercest and most persistent rivals. Inter would face Barcelona in the Champions League final, arguably one of the best teams in Europe, led by the best player in the world. But before that, Andolini had to manage his final Serie A match, which also happened to be his last Milan derby, a fitting finale that would end with the Scudetto celebrations. It was a poetic ending in Italy for Andolini. The two clubs he had rebuilt into European powerhouses, and the city that had changed his life forever, came together for his farewell. He loved Milan deeply, and although his time at AC Milan ended on difficult terms, Having a Serie A send-off in the Milan derby was a perfect way to bow out. It'd be one of the friendliest Milan derbies of his tenure, as Balotelli's early penalty in the game secured a 1-0 win for Inter, with the match lacking any of the usual heat and ferocity. In the end, Inter would lift the trophy for the final time in Andolini's career, as he got to celebrate his last domestic triumph in his adopted city, in front of both of the fan bases that had left an everlasting mark on his life. But obviously, one final game remained, the Champions League final, a match that would define the legacy of his managerial career. Held at the Olympic Stadion, both sides dreamt of leaving Berlin as champions of Europe. But for Andolini, this was a dream he could not afford to let slip through his fingers. Inter were up against an elite Barcelona side, one that featured a familiar face in the former Inter wonder kid, Mateo Kovacic. But Inter had their own new star in Lorenzo Mancini, now captaining the side. Andolini set his side up in his 5-3-2 formation to counter Barcelona's possession-based play. The stage was set. There was just 90 minutes remaining in Andolini's legendary managerial career. Both sides nearly got off to dream starts, as Busquets narrowly pulled his shot wide just 2 minutes in. And moments later, Sneijder was denied by a crucial Gerard Piqué block. Then, a mistake from David Luiz allowed Neymar to pounce and open the scoring for Barcelona. But almost immediately after, Iniesta brought down Balotelli in the box, gifting Inter a penalty. Up stepped Mario Balotelli, arguably the best penalty taker in Europe, who would miss his first ever penalty on the biggest stage of his career. Inter were stunned. They knew they might have just squandered the best chance to get back into the match. But a familiar hero rose to the occasion. Wesley Sneijder took the game by his own hands, skipping past defenders to level the score. Moments later, Sneijder stepped up yet again, with his incredible through ball finding Balotelli, who made up for his earlier miss by calmly slotting Inter into a 2-1 lead. In their greatest hour of need, Sneijder had once again answered the call. From there, the momentum was all Inter. In the final moments of the match, Mario Balotelli added a tap-in to make it 3-1. Then a rare goal from Ramirez sealed Barcelona's fate once and for all. The final whistle blew and marked the end of Andolini's legendary managerial career, with Inter crowned champions of Europe for just the 4th time in their history. Their young captain Mancini lifted the trophy, becoming one of the youngest ever to do so, while Inter fans celebrated one of the greatest teams in the club's history. It was an emotional moment for Andolini. The Italian had done it. He achieved his dream, finishing his career on his own terms, after it once seemed destined to end in heartbreak at AC Milan. And so Andolini's 3-year contract with Inter ran its course, and the Italian's illustrious career was over. Over 7 seasons with AC Milan and Inter Milan, Andolini amassed an impressive trophy cabinet that included 4 Scudetti, 3 Coppa Italia titles, 4 Supercoppas, 2 UEFA Super Cups, 1 Europa League, and finally 2 Champions League trophies. In total, he won 16 trophies, averaging more than 2 per season. He would end his career as one of the most decorated and successful Italian managers in history, and more importantly, Andolini had gone out on his own terms. And so he bid farewell to his adopted city of Milan, a place that he had come to love, as he returned to his vineyard in the countryside of Corleone. There he would spend his remaining days polishing his medals and sipping on red wine. No longer the forgotten man he once was, but a legend who had gone from a nobody to a somebody that the world would never forget. Well, it's finally over. I had a lot of fun with this save, and appreciate all the support it's received. Part 1 literally made my channel what it is, and I was honestly close to giving up on YouTube until that video, so thanks for the support, and who knows, maybe you'll see Andolini again in the future. Thanks guys.